Let's continue our exploration of working with interactive components and variants in Figma by creating an interactive drop menu. I already have a design that has a hamburger menu placed within it, and obviously when I click that menu, I'd like a menu to fly in or drop down in order to have the user make additional choices. And I'd like to be able to demonstrate how that functionality should look. So let's prototype that out by using an interactive component to do that. I'm going to select that hamburger menu as well as the line below as a frame of reference here. So I'm going to copy both of those things and actually just start by making a new frame at the same size that I wanted my content to be. So I'm going to make that iPhone 13 mini as the size, and then I could then paste those pieces in, kind of get them in the right locations as to where I want my menu to be in a different place here. So I'm going to zoom in on this particular frame. In that case, Shift F2 will zoom to selection so I can see that content. And I'm going to build out a menu for this. So one of the things I'd like to do is have some content here that will be on a background. So I'm going to have that extend all the way to the bottom of where my demo phone would go. And I'm going to change that background color to one of the colors of my scheme. I'm going to use a sort of gold color for that. And so we'll have that start sort of right at the location that we want that to do, right below that other line that was there. So I was just using that as a reference to where my menu should actually go. And now that I have that, I can start to add some of the menu items that I wanted in here. So using my type tool, I'm going to click here to add some type. And so I can select the fonts from my styles, and I was going to use this sort of header font style for that type. So I'm going to select that to make sure I've got the right style. And I could start adding in some of the pieces that I want for that. So I'm going to say that I wanted one of these to be called brands, and I'm going to make a duplicate of that. Position this kind of in the spot that I want it to be. I'll say that I'm going to start 120 down and 40 over, and then I'll make a duplicate of that particular one by holding down my Alt or Option key and dragging down, getting some of the spacing that I might want. So let's say I put it 40 pixels further down. Once I've got a second menu item, I could simply use the Control D to duplicate that down and get several other versions of this. And then I could, rename those as I wanted. So I'm going to then say this one's going to be called Styles. I'm going to have a section for men's watches. So I'll type that in. I'll have a section for women's watches. And I'll type that in. I know I want a section for different types of accessories. So whatever my information architecture plans were in terms of my menu, I could fill that out. Maybe I want a section for searching and a contact button. So I'll fill those out. Now that I've got all of those, it would make sense to group those together and apply auto layout features to them. So I'm going to do that by selecting each of those items. I'm going to go ahead and select each of these, and what we'll do is turn those into a group. I could do that by hitting Control G or right-clicking and choosing to group that selection. And then now that I have that, I'm going to apply the auto layout features, which automatically know sort of the spacing here that I have between those items. Then I could adjust that spacing on each one without having to move each one individually. So maybe I felt like that was a little too loose for my menu items. I could bring those into a different space, maybe have only 30 pixels in between each one, for example. I would have the ability to add padding. And if I was switching between a vertical or horizontal menu, I could do that as well, which is really nice with the auto layout features. The other thing that auto layout gives us is the ability to move things around. Like maybe I actually wanted my brands to start underneath to start with men's and women's watches and then go into brands and styles, etc. So I could drag and drop these, and these automatically reorder since I have auto layout applied. Really, really handy. So this is what I really want the open menu to look like, more or less. I've got that now as I want. What I might do is just select all of these things that are here in there and turn those into a component. So I'm going to go ahead and create a component out of that. And now that I've got it as a component, Often I don't like my components necessarily to be in artboards, because if I want to make variants, if they're in a frame or artboard, they might get cut off in terms of the look of that. So I could just move this outside of the artboard itself. I'll just sort of move that outside, to see this. And this will allow me now to add variants to this. And so I'm going to create a new variant, and this is going to be the open version of the menu. And I'll have, and so that created that variant down below. We can sort of zoom out to see that that we've got the two different versions of our menu here. I'm realizing maybe before I actually create that variant, there's one other thing that I'd like to do to this. So I'm going to edit undo and not make the variant quite yet. I did turn this into a component, but before I make the variant, I like to have all the elements that will be a part of my design in here already. And one of the things that I want to make sure of is I want this to be able to just sort of drop down and fill the screen. And I don't necessarily want that yellow background color to go over other elements that are in my header. So over here, I didn't want the yellow to cover that when it dropped down. So I only want it to reveal when it's underneath this particular line. And what I'm ultimately going to do in the two different variants is move this up and down and have it sort of drop down from above and animate that drop down, but I don't want to see it sort of above this line, if you will. So what I'm going to do with this is make a duplicate of this gold rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy that and make, Control D to make a duplicate. It's in the exact same spot. And I'm going to use this other one right here as a sort of rectangle mask for the rest of this content. So what I'll say is, okay, that right there is going to be a mask for all of this other content that's here. I'm going to select all of this other content that I had together. So I'll select all of this other content that's here, and then what I'm going to do is use this mask as a mask for that content. So I'm going to say use as mask, and then this particular rect mask now is going to mask all of that other content. What that means is that if I was to move any of this other content, so let's say I took that yellow and I started to move it, sort of up, we're not going to see the yellow above the mask. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want to see it up here interfering with those menu things. So that's going to be an important element of this. And before I actually make the variants of the components, I like all the pieces that are going to be in my component to be present. So now that I've got that, I can now go to my component. I might actually rename it as menu, because instead of component 1, that's going to be a better name for it. It will be my menu. And I'm going to create a variant of it. So let's click on plus to have a variant. I'm going to say that the variant here is going to be the open variant. So that's the one below is now the open version. And this one above that's here, that variant right now is being called the default. I might want to rename that to be called the closed version of the menu, right? So you can name yours. You don't have to use the default names. So I've got a closed and open version of these. Okay. In the first thing I'm going to do is go to the closed version of this. I obviously don't want to see the menu in the closed version. So one of the things that I can do with this is make sure that I change those things. And so what I'm going to do is take this yellow area that's there and simply move it up so I don't see that particular content. So I'm going to select that yellow content, and I'm going to move this up so that we don't actually see that particular content. So in the closed version, it's going to be sort of up here. I didn't want to remove it from the mask itself. So let's make sure that I just get the things that I want. So all of these, the mask itself does not need to necessarily move. I'm going to take all of these things and move those up. So I'm going to just use my shift keys to move those up, and we can stop that sort of right above the line that was there. So there it is, sort of where we don't see the rest of that content. It's going to be above the frame up here in that case. And then in this other version, it's going to be dropped down below. So that's perfect in terms of that. The other thing I wanted to do is take this content right here with the hamburger menu, and that's in the sort of let's see, which frame is which here. So there's the closed, and I wanted the open frame. So this open frame that's here, I want to take the hamburger menu that's there. I'm going to select that. I'm going to make some changes to that. So I don't want it, once this is open, I don't want it to look like a hamburger. I actually want it to look like a close button. And I'm going to animate the 3 lines that are a part of that to sort of animate into a closed view. So that line that's in the center, it's at a Y position of 6. I'm going to note that. And I'm going to take that and make that stroke 0% opacity so that we don't see that particular line. Then what I'll do is I'll take these other lines, put them to the position of 6, and then rotate them by 45 degrees. So I'm going to do the first one, then I'm going to click the second one, put it into that mid position, and then say that that one is going to rotate by minus 45 degrees to go the other way. That creates a kind of close area for that. And these lines will actually animate because I have the exact same names of the lines and layers here in the open menu compared to the closed version of the menu. We are using the same layer names there. Then those layers will, and those elements will animate. We could allow those to sort of animate. And you'll see that the hamburger menu can animate to the closed version of itself when we open up the menu and see the other choices. We could click on that then to return back to the closed state. So perfect. I've got the sort of visuals that I want on my menu. And now what I'm going to do with this is actually simply I make it interactive. The one thing that I'm realizing I'm missing is that the actual menu buttons themselves are kind of small. I want them to have a little larger touch area or mouse area for interaction. And so I'm going to create a larger hotspot for those particular areas to enable that to work a little bit better. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to the closed version first and go to my rectangle tool and just sort of draw a larger box around that hotspot area. So that larger box, I can call it sort of the hotspot, if you will, and I'm going to duplicate that particular content. I'm going to go ahead and copy that content and paste it as well into the open frame of that, so that there's a hotspot in the open frame and there's a hotspot in the closed frame. Now, I don't necessarily want that hotspot to be a gray box, and so what I'm going to do is just make that 0% opacity in both of these particular cases, but I could use that content as a clickable area so that it's a little bit bigger to touch, so a sort of larger hotspot. Okay, I think I can wire this up now with interactivity. So I've got my component with my menu and the 2 different variant states of the menu itself. I'm going to go to the prototype mode for this now. I'm going to find that hotspot. So in the closed version here, that hotspot is right there. I'm going to make that hotspot link down to the closed version or to the open version of the menu. So when I tap on that hotspot, it's going to smart animate to the open version of the menu. And it seems appropriate that might take about 300 milliseconds. It should be relatively snappy. Maybe I want that just a little faster. It's going to drop in quite quickly in that particular case. And that menu will open, and then what I'm going to do is find the hotspot in the open version and have that link back, so that will close to the closed version. So on tapping that, it's going to change to the closed version of our menu and animate at about the same speed. So that's great. These are now interacting back and forth to each other, and now I simply need to place this menu into my design. So I can come back over to my actual design where I've got the line and the hamburger still there. And what I'll do is go to my assets, find the menu, and place that where I want that into my artboard. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in where I wanted it. And so we'll go ahead and drop it. It's in the sort of wrong spot here, so I'm going to move it down into the right position. But we should see the same lines there, and that's why I was using these as a frame of reference, so that I'd be able to overlay those lines and get this right into the right position there in terms of that. So it looks like that's in the right spot, 0, perfect. And so I'm going to go back to my layers now, and that menu is going to be there. I no longer need the hamburger that was the original graphic, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that from my layers. And I can also delete that line that was there. I'm going to just hide that menu for a second, find that line. I don't need, that's in the other design. I don't really necessarily need that line in my component per se, but I already have it in the menu, so I'm going to delete it from there, turn my menu back on, and there's that line. And I'll be able to add this menu to sort of any other frame or artboard and reuse this component menu in that case. Let's make sure that that's working. I could go ahead and click on the presentation to take a look to make sure that my interactive drop menu is working. And when I click on it, you can see that it's dropping down to show my additional menu choices. If I click on the close button, you'll see that it animates back up. And the hamburger menu itself is animating. You'll see that it animates to the close and then animates back to its original position. So we're getting the functionality of our drop menu. And certainly I could have done this differently where it like flew in from the side, or we had that overlay in a different way. You can also certainly work with overlays for your menus as a way of simulating that as well. But working with an interactive component that I can reuse in multiple artboards and edit in one place can be a really handy way of enabling this type of more advanced interaction and drop menu functionality. So hopefully you've enjoyed and were able to implement a similar solution if you were following along in your own file.